does the name Dulles mean to most Americans? If you live in D.C. or have spent any time flying through the city, you know it's our capital's major airport, the one that's hard to get to and always crowded, like most airports. But to history buffs and students of the American government, the name Dulles means much, much more. John Foster Dulles, after whom the D.C. airport was named, served as America's 52nd Secretary of State under President Dwight D. Eisenhower. But his younger brother, perhaps more famous, or should we say infamous, in 1953, Allen Dulles became the 5th United States Director of Central Intelligence and the first civilian to hold that position. He would go on to hold the directorship for 8.5 years, longer than any director before or after him. And while Allen Dulles held a courteous and friendly outward demeanor, his tenure as director of the CIA saw the agency involved in some notorious underhand dealings, coup after coup, and everything else we've come to expect from America's security apparatus today. Under Dulles' watch, Operation Ajax took place, unlawfully replacing Iran's Mossadegh with the Shah in 1953, eventually leading to the Iranian Revolution in 1979 that has seen Iran and the U.S. at odds ever since. Dulles' CIA also helped overthrow the democratically elected president of Guatemala in 1953 and committed a serious blunder in Cuba at the Bay of Pigs in 1961. Well, to discuss all of this and much, much more, we are joined today by David Talbot, author of the brand new biography of Allen Dulles entitled The Devil's Chessboard: Allen Dulles, the CIA, and the Rise of America's Secret Government. Thank you, David, for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Oh, man. Well, just a lot of people, it's now been a while since Dulles walked the earth and ran the CIA. So give us an idea of what shaped Allen Dulles into becoming such a powerful force in the American government in the 50s and 60s.
Well, I call him Dick Cheney on steroids. He and his brother, John Foster, were born to a prominent family. They were born to power. This is a family of secretaries of state, of international lawyers, and so they were groomed from childhood, really, to be members of what C. Wright Mills, the famous sociologist in the 1950s, called the power elite. And really, from World War I, you have both brothers beginning to become very powerful, both on Wall Street, where they run the most powerful law firm, Sullivan and Cromwell, and then later, of course, in Washington.
Wow. Well, so one of the amazing things about reading your book was Allen Dulles' treatment of certain Nazi officials towards the end of World War II, at least. Can you kind of take us through the involvement and what it meant for post-war Europe and post-war America?
Well, this is an example of Allen Dulles, again, defying the president. During World War II, the Soviet Union took the brunt of the horrible war, fighting against Hitler. And Joseph Stalin was very concerned that there not be any separate deal-making on the side with the other allies and Hitler's regime, with Winston Churchill in London and Franklin Roosevelt in Washington. But Allen Dulles always felt all along that the Soviet Union was the main enemy. In fact, he and his brother had many good friends in the Nazi regime. They'd done business with these people before. When he was in Switzerland as our top spy in continental Europe during the war, he was helping hide German assets in Swiss banks. And he was intent on reestablishing a strong Germany after the war that included elements of the Nazi regime as a bulwark against the Soviet Union. So he goes about in the final days of the war not only cutting a separate deal with Nazi forces in Italy, but setting up rat lines, as they were called, so these escaping war criminals could flee Germany over the Alps, down through Italy, and overseas to safety. He even installed some of these war criminals in power in West Germany, including Reinhard Gehlen, who became the top spy master for West Germany's democratic government after being Hitler's spy master on the Eastern Front.
How much did Dulles have a hand in stymieing the reports of what was really happening to the Jews? I think a lot of people, there's a lot of misconceptions about how much people knew. It wasn't something that was on CNN every day. It's not as if everyone in the world knew, because those things were kind of pushed to the side. How much did Dulles have his hand in that?
Well, a very important hand, because here's the situation. It's very volatile what's happening in Germany. The final solution gets underway in 1943, the plans to exterminate Jews on a mass basis at these concentration camps, and the word is slowly leaking out of occupied Europe. Well, Allen Dulles was at our listening post. He was the guy in Switzerland who was supposed to be getting these reports. And in fact, some brave Germans were indeed slipping across the border with documents stuffed down their pants to show Allen Dulles proof that the concentration camps were being built and that Jews were starting to be transported, and desperate to get Western help. Dulles basically sat on that information. He didn't feel that the plight of the Jews was the #1 priority. Again, his #1 priority was maintaining a strong Germany after the war and basically pushing back the Soviet Union.
That's really incredible. I want to play a clip that we found of Dulles talking about, the CIA and the role of interventionism and in its role in U.S. interventionism. Let's play that clip and hear what Dulles has to say.
The idea that it is necessarily nefarious, it's always engaged in overthrowing governments, that's false. That's for the birds. Now, there are times when the United States government feels that the developments in another government, such as in the Vietnam situation, is of a nature to imperil the safety and the security and the peace of the world, and ask the Central Intelligence Agency to be its agent in that particular situation.
David, I want to ask you, how often was Mr. Dulles involved in overthrowing? I mean, is he lying through his teeth there?
Absolutely. Allen Dulles was a consummate liar, and he had a gullible audience with the media. In this case, John Chancellor at NBC News actually asked him some fairly tough questions. But in case after case, Allen Dulles was a master at manipulating the media. He was very close socially to the Sulzberger family, to the people who ran the New York Times, to the Washington Post owners, people who ran Newsweek, CBS. When I went through his personal files at Princeton, where his documents are kept, you can see all these very cozy letters back and forth between these media executives and Dulles. So, yes, the truth is, despite what he was saying here on this NBC show, was that he repeatedly subverted and overthrew governments, not just in Guatemala, Iran, Congo, which we know about, with disastrous results in those countries that we're still paying the cost for, but in friendly governments. I tell the story, I think for the first time, at least in a major way in the United States, about Allen Dulles' covert support for a military coup aimed at overthrowing the friendly government of President Charles de Gaulle in France in 1961. This occurred right on the heels of the Cuban Bay of Pigs invasion. So poor John Kennedy has just taken office. He's trying to wrestle with the Cuba crisis at the same time as he's starting to hear outraged cries from our allies in Paris. What's going on in Washington? Your CIA is trying to overthrow me. Kennedy had no idea. And the French ambassador to Washington was forced to report back to his government, President Kennedy is not in control of his own government.
Right.
One more revelation that's in my book. Basically, Allen Dulles, among other things, created a kill team, an assassination team that was used overseas to target not just the leaders we know about, Fidel Castro, Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, but journalists, opposition political figures in many different countries. And they were a very effective killing team. He brought home that killing team, I believe, to Dallas in November 1963. And why do I say this? Because the person that he put in charge of that kill team, William Harvey, a notorious CIA assassin, who was in charge of the assassination plot against Castro, working with the mafia that was later exposed by the Church Committee in the 1970s, he spotted on a plane flying from Rome, where he was stationed at the time, to Dallas in early November 1963 by his deputy. And when his deputy says, "Why are you going to Dallas? What are you doing here?" he's very vague, and Harvey says, "Just to look around." His deputy, his own deputy, a man named Mark Wyatt, told his children that he was convinced that William Harvey, Dulles' top assassin, was involved in the killing of President Kennedy.
Wow, that's pretty incredible.
It's incredible, and I think your book, The Devil's Chessboard, Allen Dulles, the CIA, and the Rise of America's Secret Government, is such an important read for people. We say on the show a lot is that if you really understand the history, not just maybe what you were taught in school and what the overarching sort of narrative is about things, you really learn how things are. And knowing this guy who really structured the intelligence apparatus we see today, I think gives you an eye into how we're going. Thank you so much, David,
Thank you very much
for joining us.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Give you one more revelation that's in my book. Basically, Allen Dulles, among other things, created a kill team, an assassination team that was used overseas to target not just the leaders we know about, Fidel Castro, Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, but journalists, opposition political figures in many different countries. And they were a very effective killing team. He brought home that killing team, I believe, to Dallas in November 1963. And why do I say this? Because the person that he put in charge of that kill team, William Harvey, a notorious CIA assassin who was in charge of the assassination plot against Castro, working with the mafia that was later exposed by the Church Committee in the 1970s, he spotted on a plane flying from Rome, where he was stationed at the time, to Dallas in early November 1963 by his deputy. And when his deputy says, "Why are you going to Dallas? What are you doing here?" he's very vague, and Harvey says, "Just to look around." His deputy, his own deputy, a man named Mark Wyatt, told his children that he was convinced that William Harvey, Dulles' top assassin, was involved in the killing of President Kennedy.
Wow, that's pretty incredible.
It's incredible, and I think your book, The Devil's Chessboard, Allen Dulles, the CIA, and the Rise of America's Secret Government, is such an important read for people. We say on the show a lot is that if you really understand the history, not just maybe what you were taught in school and what the overarching sort of narrative is about things, you really learn how things are. And knowing this guy who really structured the intelligence apparatus we see today, I think gives you an eye into how we're going. Thank you so much.